Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special fundraiser event hosted by the Confraternity of St. James. We are kicking off our week of festivities to celebrate St. James's Day in this holy year of 2021, and we're delighted that so many of you could join us in what is the evening over here in the UK for this very exciting panel discussion between four leading lights of the Camino de Santiago. We have muted all of you for the moment, but don't worry, you will be able to put your questions to our VIP guests later on this evening. We'll be here for, I'd say, around an hour to an hour and a half, and you can send in your questions at any time via the chat box, or you can click raise hand, and we'll get round to as many of you as we can a bit later. But now to introduce our guests officially, please welcome our compere for the evening, the very funny, much admired Camino author and radio professional, Mr. Rudy Noriega.
Thanks, Freddie, for your kind words. I've got to try and live up to that now, haven't I? You have a strange definition of the word professional. Anyway, it's a great honour to introduce today's panel. I can't imagine that there are very few of us, at least, who don't have a copy of at least one of these authors' books on their shelves, and quite possibly more than one. I will start off with introducing Rebekah Scott. She is an American former newspaper journalist who moved in 2006 to a tiny pueblo on the Meseta, smack in the middle of the Camino Frances. She and her husband opened their home to pilgrims in need and have been involved in guide writing, training of hospitaleros, and volunteer recruiting. And they also do the annual cleanup of the Camino from rubbish as well. She describes her life in her village in the book A Furnace Full of God, which of course you can buy in the CSJ bookshop. So big welcome, please, for Rebekah. Right, also joining us is Laurie Dennett. She is the former chair of the CSJ, so will be familiar to a lot of you here, I think, and is the author of A Hug for the Apostle, which is the book based on her walk from Chartres to Santiago, which again is also available in the CSJ bookshop. She has also walked to Rome and Jerusalem and lives in La Laguna de Tablas, which is near Ocebrero. She's also a member of the CSJ Refugio Gautselmo committee and is very familiar to a lot of us, I'm sure. And so a big welcome for Laurie as well. It's strange silent clapping, isn't it? And John Rafferty, or Johnnie Walker is his author's name. He walked to Santiago and decided to go one better and decided to live there. He's written 16 books on the Camino. Most of these were guidebooks, which have been published by the CSJ. And all the proceeds go to pilgrims and other charities. Again, a very familiar face and voice in CSJ circles. So hello to you, Johnny. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
And finally, John Brierley. An existential crisis gave him the chance to break through to a wider perspective in his life. During his time out, he ended up in Saint Jean-Pierre-de-Port. And until that time, he was unaware of the existence of the Camino. So it's a good place to find out about it. Since that time, the metaphor of the Camino as a spiritual journey has become his life and his living. You may recognize the name from his guidebooks. He's also got a room named after him in an albergue on the Camino Portuguese. So I think he's the only person I'm aware of who has that. So hello to you as well, John.
Hello, good evening. Lovely to be here.
Well, let's get the C word out of the way, shall we, in COVID. Rebekah, you live on the Camino and you take in pilgrims. What's the last 18 months been like for you?
It's been really very strange. It's like a return to the 90s on the Camino. I first discovered the Camino in 1993, and now it's the same kind of traffic and very few people stopping here. During the original big lockdown, it was a big rush to get all the pilgrims off the Camino, and then it was nothing at all for a very long time. Just a couple of transient men who stopped here, and the police came, and it was very exciting. But mostly it was nothing. It was very strange, much like life, I suppose, for other people, where you didn't go out, you didn't move, nothing happened. But in a certain way, it was also very refreshing and very much a rest time. And we were able to recover from all the many years of working very hard. And we could just stop and breathe. And I think the Camino also took a real breather and relaxed a bit and refreshed itself. We'll see the outcomes as time goes on. You know, like last year I was able to walk again for a little while, and this year again. We're opening new albergues. The management is changing now in many places. Things are coming alive now, thank God. But it has been very strange, but it's also, you can see a lot of very positive things as well coming out of this. So your question is very large. We're talking about a long period of time, but I think we'll be able to find some very positive outcomes from this.
Does that sound familiar to you, Laurie?
Oh, yes, it does. I feel I've had a very, very quiet year. I got stuck in Canada right at the beginning of all of this. I went over for what was supposed to be 2 weeks, and the state of emergency was declared just before I was due to fly back, and all of a sudden there were no flights. And I was stuck for 17 weeks, which was longer than it took me to walk to Jerusalem. It was a very sobering thought to be stuck in my sister's house, unable to go out or to do anything other than a weekly grocery shop, and look at what was going on here only by, you know, consulting my rickety old iPad. And then in July, when there was a bit of a window, I did manage to fly home here, and really have gone nowhere else since. And since pilgrims don't come down here unless they are lost, I see very few. I've gone up to Osabrero a number of times over the course of the year, but nothing like as frequently as I usually would. And it's been a very strange sensation to see that town, you know, tiny though it is. I can remember it when there were 1,000 pilgrims a night sleeping there in 1993. To see it absolutely deserted again. And I hadn't seen it like that since 1987. I think the first autumn I was out here staying up there, I counted 5 pilgrims between the Feast of El Pilar on the 12th of October and Christmas Day. Well, it's been a bit like that. And in fact, there were no pilgrims at all. It's been very, very strange to see Osabrero deserted, really completely deserted, nothing open at all during much of that time. But what has been a joy has been the resurgence of nature, because everybody reports sightings of deer and our resident eagles, and you know, somebody even claims to have seen a bear on the main road. I don't know whether that's true, but you know, to see a deer in one's backyard, as a friend of mine did, is quite something. Anyway, I've probably said enough, but I would say a very, very quiet year, and contact with pilgrims pretty minimal, quite honestly, sadly, but there just haven't been any.
How about you, Johnnie? You're at the destination, you're at the end where you see more pilgrims than most. What's it been like for you?
Well, as Rebekah said, it's been a very strange experience. I'm very lucky that in 2020, I walked 3 Caminos. I've loved walking in winter time, and I was out in January on the Via de la Plata, and then in February into March, I decided to walk as far as I could up the Via de la Plata. On March the 14th, I walked into Merida, starving, looking for a restaurant, and the shutters were all being pulled down because the state of emergency had been declared in Spain. I immediately came back to Santiago, and that was us in Spain. Rebekah said it, Laurie said it. We were inside our houses by law, police patrolling the streets for, I don't know, 14 weeks. Now, I have to say to you, personally, I really found that quite difficult. The loss of personal control and ability to make choices and go out and freedom. I found it spiritually and emotionally very, very difficult indeed. Fortunately, after the 14 weeks thing, we were allowed to go out of our houses and get exercise and so forth. And there was a period of time where we were allowed to travel. Rebekah went on Camino, and I decided to walk the Camino Francés. And I walked from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Santiago in the end of September, October. And I have to say to you, it was a once in a lifetime. I feel quite ambivalent about it. It was terribly sad to see the Camino empty of pilgrims, albergues closed, businesses wondering about the future. You know, talking to people who had invested in developing facilities for the Holy Year, who just couldn't pay the bank loan. But there was a wonderful aspect to it of seeing the Camino Francés, as Rebekah says, back in the 1980s or early 1990s. And well, I feel very privileged to have been able to do that. Now the pilgrims have started coming back. The vaccination program is marching ahead here in Spain. And although infections are soaring, the death rate is very low indeed. And hospital capacity, I mean, ICU capacity last Friday was at 9.8%. So plenty of room in ICU if you're unlucky enough to get the virus and have to go there. So we're making progress. 7,000 pilgrims arrived in Santiago last week, and it has a feeling of normality about it, although 90% of people are still wearing masks outside and inside.
Right, John, you spend, under normal circumstances, you spend an awful lot of your year on the Camino. How's it been for you?
Well, really, this last 18 months has been very much participating in being part of virtual Caminos, literally all around the world. I mean, it's amazing how people have got together wherever they are and have, you know, instigated virtual Caminos in their own areas. And it is an aspect, I think, that's it leads on to a question I think you've got probably coming up later about, you know, how the Camino might develop. But I do think that it's necessary, and I do think that we will find more people creating their own experiences, you know, in their own home environments. I mean, I spent a lot of time virtually with Australian Caminos. I was there just before the COVID hit. I spent a month going around the various associations there, and you know, 10,000 Australians come every year. You know, a lot of them for the second, third, fourth, or fifth time, and that's a massive implication for the environment. So I do think that people will, you know, Johnnie and I were in Mayo a couple of years ago for the Irish confraternity when they instigated the Celtic Camino around the Croagh Patrick. So I do think there'll, you know, what will emerge out of this is people creating their own experiences, because after all, I mean, certainly the way I look at it, the Camino is, you know, is a way of life. You know, once we accept that, you know, the journey here is a spiritual journey through life, well, then it's, by definition, we can never not be on a Camino. And not the specific Caminos in Spain or Portugal or France or whatever we might be. But I think that's an aspect that will probably, you know, gather pace. So it's been a virtual year for me because I haven't been able to, unlike Johnnie, who lives out there, to actually walk in Spain or Portugal. I'm hoping to get out shortly, but it's been a virtual Camino 18 months as far as I'm concerned. But people have really warmed to that and you know, kept in touch and kept alive the sort of the sense of the Camino family and what that means to them. You know, and one of the great aspects of the Camino, it is literally involves every nationality on earth. So I think that sense of camaraderie and a worldwide sense of family is alive and has been kept alive through the media, through things like Zoom, which we're on talking with tonight. So there has been activity at that level, which has been, I think, very heartening, and a lot of people have been engaged in that way during the 18 months.
Right, Johnnie, you mentioned that things are getting back to normal. Can normality really be achieved back on the Camino, or are things going to change beyond all recognition, do you think?
I personally don't think so. I think that pilgrims are pilgrims are pilgrims. And at the first sign of the green light, the Spanish pilgrims took to the Camino, and they're still walking, and pilgrims will return. Of course, we're concerned about some of the infrastructure. Rebekah's the person to ask about this, not me. They're very concerned about the donativo albergues and the albergues that depend on public subscriptions and donations. They're the backbone of hospitality in the Camino. But assuming that the infrastructure survives and grows and develops, the pilgrims will return. I have no doubt about that. I mean, even during the lockdown year, 60,000 pilgrims received Compostelas here in Santiago. Now, that was a fifth, 20% of the previous year, but it's the core of the Camino. It's in the process of recovering. More and more pilgrims were in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port today starting off. More and more pilgrims were in Cebreiro starting off, in Sarria starting off. And we'll see how many arrive for the Feast of St. James on Sunday.
Okay, Rebekah, then that prompts the question to you. What's the infrastructure like at the moment, and can it sustain the pilgrims that you get for a holy year?
Oh, that's a puzzler. I'm right now in the midst of feeling like I'm playing 3D chess. I coordinate the hospitality for FIX, the Fraternidad Internacional del Camino de Santiago, and we focus on being as international as possible. We're opening 2 new albergues, and we run one in Grado on the Camino Primitivo, and staffing them is becoming a real nightmare because like that, I have 2 people supposedly running the new one in Canfranc in September, but they're both Dutch, and the Dutch authorities are saying, no, you can't go to Spain. What do? I move somebody from here to there. We were supposed to open Nájera on the 1st of August, and the mayor says no. So we have to have 4 hospitaleros moved somewhere else. It's like playing a Rubik's Cube. You know, you have to move this color around here and move that here and slide that. And I really, really don't like puzzles. It's not my bag. So for people on the ground, it's a difficult time. It's a big dance. I really want to have as much internationality as I can in the staffing that I do, but it looks like Spain is going to have to provide our hospitaleros for a while because of the border questions. We don't know if we're going to be shut down anytime soon. There has been an outbreak on the Camino this week. We don't know what's going to happen. We might have to shut the whole puppy down real quick, like we did back in March of last year. We just don't know. So and my hair is turning gray. You can see these.
I dream of having gray hair.
Yeah.
So do I.
But yeah, it's a tough go for people on the ground. But there are lots and lots of pilgrims on the Camino. There's plenty. We've had, in my own house, we've had 6 this past week. Just your usual lovely people seek us out. And both the albergues in our town are open. It's almost like normal on a daily basis, but we just don't have the mix that we're used to having, and we have a much smaller volume. But it's nice, but it's not. We don't feel confident in it yet. So, and pilgrims have to be extremely flexible. Some of them have a problem with that, but they have. You don't have a choice here, as you know. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a big puzzle. It's a tough go right now. I'm working very hard.
How concerned are you about it?
I have a real problem with people sleeping on the street. I really don't like to see that. I also don't like to have, I'm responsible for 3 albergues. I cannot open them without adequate staffing. And I feel very responsible for that. But the pilgrims are pilgrims. I have to remind myself, we don't owe them a place to stay. If we can't open, it's up to them to find a place to sleep. So I have to remember that the pilgrims are they roll the dice every day. So this is their adventure, and maybe we're contributing to their big fun adventure and their adventure story of the future when they roll up and we have nobody to host them. So I have to sort of let it go and know that, and be confident that, nothing is under control, but it's okay, because this is a Camino, and it's an adventure.
Laurie,
for me too.
Laurie, what's the situation like in and around Dos Sobrero?
Well, as of this morning, when I deliberately went up to try and get a sense of how things were on the ground, and this kind of spins on from what both John and Rebekah have said, I was astonished to once again see the place empty. And I was there on Friday, and it was pretty full, lots of jolly people sitting outside in the sunshine, really enjoying being there. And this morning, there was simply nobody around. I met very briefly a Spanish pilgrim and a Dutch couple and an American family traveling by car. That was it. And the word in the hotel is that all the reservations for this weekend have been canceled. They were full, and they now have no reservations at all. And this, they believe, is in consequence of the outbreak of this past week. People are still extremely nervous. And if pilgrims are nervous, of course, you can imagine how the people actually running establishments are too, and they are quite saddened by this. I should say that here in Galicia, not all the albergues are open yet. And I think the thinking behind that is to try and give some of the private facilities a bit of a chance and encourage people to stay there. But I don't know what the situation in the public albergue was, but the reservations as of today had just evaporated and there was nobody up there. So if that's a rather depressing note, I'm sorry to be the one that adds it, but I think people are quite twitchy right now.
It's a difficult thing to square, isn't it? Because you want the pilgrims to arrive at these places and take up places in the albergue, but at the same time, there's always that threat that something might happen. And I know anecdotally that some of the locals on the Camino del Norte were a bit worried about pilgrims passing through. And it's a very difficult thing, isn't it, Laurie, to balance that kind of equation out. You want the pilgrims, it's part of the economy, it's also part of it's a way of life as well.
Yes, I mean, you want to meet nervous people, you should meet my neighbors, who get very, anxious, because I have a garden that is open to the public, and not that there's been much public in the last year, but if a strange car comes and people visit the garden, they always want to know whether they were people I know and where were they from and might they have brought the bug and did they wear their masks and so on. Well, the garden is enormous, so I don't think anything's going to be transmitted there, but they are just plain edgy, and everybody around here still assiduously wears their mask and obeys all the strictures, even though we've had 5 cases in this municipality in the entire year, and one of them was a false positive. It's just nerves, I think. There's a lot of elderly folk around here, that's why. And if the people themselves aren't elderly, it's younger people being anxious on behalf of their parents or their grandparents.
Is that something you recognise, Rebekah?
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Yeah. Is that a scenario that you're familiar with as well?
Well, I think out here, we're not quite so twitchy because the people here are all out farmers. And I live right in the middle of the Meseta, and the people in this village they have to be in contact with other people to make a living. So, and they're not focused on pilgrims at all. They're focused on farming. And they have to be out and about. There's not the kind of fear. During the big lockdown, maybe there was. The people in the village were not afraid of one another, still rang the Angelus bells to scare away the bug. It's hard for me to generalize, but they're, I know that Laurie's town is much more small and insular. And well, my town, we're 22 people, and hers, I think, is about 8 or 10. There's a big difference there. Yeah. And then when I would come to see her, they would all like twitching their windows, window curtains. It was really kind of paranoid. But here they're a little bit more open to the movement of people through.
Johnny, you were going to say something there, I think.
Well, here in Santiago, you can't get a bed for this weekend. The beds are full, the hotels are full, the albergues which are open are full. I was trying to help 2 pilgrims today who have left it far too late to try and find accommodation because the place is buzzing. The street entertainment, such as it is this year, it's reduced, but there are 2 huge concerts taking place. One in the Plaza Obradoiro with 700 people, one in the Plaza Quintana with 500 people. The King and Queen will arrive. The President of Galicia will be here. The President of Spain will come. And what can I say? I think as the vaccination program vaccinates more and more and more people, people will grow in confidence. That's been happening. The economy needs to open up. There's no doubt about that. And as long as people are individually careful, what's going to happen to them? They can get infected, they become ill, but the chances of dying are becoming less and less and less. The chances of being in intensive care unit are less and less. And if you do need to go into ICU, we know there's room these days. So quite different from the situation a year ago.
Johnny, do they make predictions about how many pilgrims they're expecting in Santiago? Have they got a particular guess for this year?
Yeah, I think they've given up guessing. all estimates went out of the window. I mean, we were predicting at least 500,000 pilgrims coming for the Holy Year. That might happen next year by the end of 2022. Yes. William is correcting me. He's saying that I've referred to President Sanchez as the President of Spain. He's the President of the government. Sorry, William.
There's all kinds of some conversations happening that I'm blissfully unaware of.
Well, it's like having a guardian angel on your shoulder.
Yeah. Well, it's all been doom and gloom so far, which is, I mean, we can do with that. Now, let's look forward a little bit. Let's look on the positive side. Rebekah, let's go back to you. What do you think the next couple of years will hold for the pilgrimage?
Oh, well, if they do get a handle on COVID, please God, next year, I think it's going to be a bun fight. It's going to be crazy. I'm kind of warning people. There's a lot of North Americans who are waiting till next year to go already. And just they're this great pressure to burst loose and go. And I do know that the infrastructure still is not ready for a huge big wave of people. Maybe by then it will be. So the year after we'll steady out. I don't think we'll ever go back to what we were. I kind of hope we don't. I hope we've evolved a bit. And it seems like the pilgrims, well, we open our church now every morning for pilgrims to stop in. We do this every summer. The pilgrims we're seeing, a fewer number, but are a bit more serious, a bit more pilgrimy, rather than the wild party animal people that we often see this time of year. So perhaps this COVID thing has, well, it's certainly eliminated a lot of the more wild party animal behavior. But we only see 1 or 2 people at a time, and they are stopping and actually going into the church and spending some time there, which is unusual. So I'm hoping that this kind of a serious, more pilgrimy attitude may continue in the future. Maybe the plague has filtered out some of the people who weren't really serious, more like a background for their cheap holiday or something. Perhaps we'll get a little bit more serious about what a pilgrimage is and the fact that this is a pilgrim path and not just a cheap holiday.
I also wonder, Rebekah, if the threat of death with COVID has made many of us reflect on our lives. I know, people have been in touch with me that I hadn't been in contact with for years, reaching out. And as you know, in October, when I walked to Camino Frances, this is a bit pious actually, but I said to people, if you would like me to carry your prayers and intentions to Santiago, just send me an email. Well, 377 people wrote to me. And some of these were deeply personal issues about relationships and folk who had died and so forth. And so, I mean, this is what John Brierley speaks about, the way in which the Camino can touch the spirit and revive the spirit and nurture us. And I think over the months and certainly next year, we will see a great thirst for a Camino experience. And hopefully you're right, Rebekah, that it's people who are, I don't mean taking it seriously in the fact that there's no fun, but engaging fully in the spiritual aspects of the Camino to Santiago.
John, this is something that you've written about a great deal in your guidebooks about the spirituality. Do you see it the same way?
Yes, I mean, I love to hear what Rebekah and John have said. I mean, I really believe that this is so. I think that the pandemic. I think that this is the first of. This isn't the only pandemic. We're going to see other pandemics coming in, and then we've got around the corner. We've got this really dramatic climatic shift. I mean, it's really engaging people at a much deeper level, and I think people have been exposed to. The big existential questions, what's it all about? Why am I here? Where are we going? Those sort of deep existential questions are arising in people's minds. I think there is a big shift happening. And I very much hope that with the Camino, of course, has always been a place for people to reflect. I mean, it takes a month to walk the Frances, it takes 5-6 weeks to walk up the Via de la Plata. This is a big solid block of time away from the familiar for people to really get in touch with themselves and why we're here and where we're going and what we can do to help out the worsening situations on virtually every level, whether it's economic, societal, environmental. I mean, humanity is facing really, really big issues that won't be necessarily resolved just by sort of tweaking the externals. It'll be resolved when we make some sort of a shift in consciousness of how we understand ourselves and the universe and nature. And I really think and believe and hope and see to some extent with the sort of people who write in with me or who dialogue with me, I think this is happening. And I think it's if you like, it's a very positive aspect and spin-off from COVID, and likewise the environmental issues that we're facing down the road. People are now beginning to ask big questions, and I think that's very healthy.
Did you come across? Oh, sorry, you carry on, Rebekah.
Yeah, this is not a time to apologize for piety. The Camino de Santiago is a holy place, and it's up to us to keep it that way. And this is something that's really important for we who are involved now to maintain the holiness of this place. And I feel very strongly about that.
Rudy, may I ask Laurie a question?
Go ahead.
Laurie, this disaster which has happened in the world, which has affected the Camino so badly, what would Elias have said about this? So if the parish priest of Othebrairo, who painted the yellow arrows and revived the Camino, was here now, what would he be saying about the Camino as we look to the future?
Oh heavens, I'm not sure I can presume to,
yes, you can.
Give an answer to that. I think he would be, well, it's interesting. He was a very, very sensitive man. And I happened to be sitting next to him on the evening when the news of the murder of those 5 Salvadorian Jesuits, or the 5 Jesuits in El Salvador, came onto the television set, and he simply fell apart. he just wept and wept and wept. And I think this tragedy that has overcome us would affect him very deeply, but I can't presume to say what he would say or how he would respond in the face of it. I think I literally can't contribute anything on that, I'm afraid. It's 30 years, you know. I've often thought some of the things that have happened on the Camino would shake him and affect him emotionally very much. And then I've also thought that were he still here, some of them undoubtedly would not have happened, because he'd have got up and protested to such a degree that the authorities would have just backed down, you know.
What kind of behavior are you talking about, Laurie?
Well, you know, I can remember a time when the idea of charging a pilgrim for anything was anathema. That was in 1990. And all of a sudden you had an albergue that took the place of the old refugio with the straw in it, etc., and people setting up bars and so on. But the idea of actually making anything of a living from pilgrims was in those days anathema. The only accommodation in Osabrero was the hospederia, and yes, people could rent. You know, you could take a room there, but the meals were at cost. Nobody ever took a salary out of the hospederia. Elias's stipend went straight back into it, and the family lived on a subsistence level as you know, to enable them to keep doing what they were doing. The first introduction of money into that equation was when the Diocese of Lugo began to charge Elias's family rent after he died. And all of a sudden, you had to put, you know, a price on things that had never had a price put on them before. Anyway, and the idea of an albergue that charged pilgrims, well, that's another ballgame. I know now is now and then was then, but many paces in between. I think a certain person would probably have raised his voice and in protest. One of his most resounding sayings, at least to me, is, "Let us always keep the Camino, i.e. simple, affordable, accessible, inclusive, universal." And, you know, the idea of kind of carving it up in pieces was not within his vision, I think.
I want to go back to something that Rebekah said, and this is about, I think you described as the party pilgrim. Is this something that's you've all come across on your various pilgrimages? John, I mean, you've traveled more than most on these, John. Is this something that's bothered you?
Oh, yes, I mean, you know, I first went on the Camino in 1987. I mean, you know, it's nearly 25 years ago. And since that time, I mean, you know, there were no numbers then, but once the numbers started coming, you know, there were, you know, parties. I mean, when I was last there, you know, just 2 years ago now, just before the lockdown, I mean, you know, my fellow Irishmen, I mean, you know, you get a sort of a group of, you know, 20 people singing songs, and, you know, the bar is full, and, you know, you wonder what on earth is, you know, but I've learned over the years, you know, really, I've had to work on myself very, very hard not to make judgments, because what I have found time and time again is that whatever the reason we head off on the Camino, and if we, you know, it's wonderful. I always encourage people to, you know, have an intention, you know, an inner intention for, you know, why they're walking the route. But most, you know, I would imagine relatively few people do. They're there, a party develops, and whatever the cynicism at the start of the route, something nearly always happens. I mean, when I, you know, see these people at the end of a month on the Camino, something has shifted. So it would be lovely, because we spoke of it earlier, to see and understand that the Camino it's a sacred spiritual route. They're designed to help people come to terms with a bigger picture or a bigger understanding of themselves, whatever their reason for going. But just by very fact of being there, I think, shifts do happen. But I take up Rebekah's point that, I've seen, party animals really go for it. And I struggle to see, what intentionality they had setting out. But as I say, something often happens along the way. So I think we have to be really careful not to make a judgment. But it would be lovely to see. I know Johnnie has always talked about, the donativos and how, sadly they're sort of, disappearing for, I think, a multitude of reasons. I mean, it's costly to keep these things going, and volunteer work is only half the equation. But I think that it would be lovely to somehow, I'm always encouraging people, if they ask about, where would I go, what would I do? I'd say, well, look, if you're looking for a hiking trail, I mean, there are fantastic places in Europe. There are hundreds and thousands of kilometers, a beautiful countryside. You please don't come on the Camino unless you want to have some sort of an inner experience, because it's designed to welcome people who are on a journey, whatever that is, bereavement, next steps in life, whatever. So I think, if that message gets out, that would be good. I think it's a pity that, the Camino has become fallen so much into the tourist framework. It used to be held very much in a sort of a cultural sense, certainly in Portugal, but now it's sort of, the pilgrim dollar lights up, lots of councils along the way. So I don't know how that's going to pan out, but I think that we can help it by, encouraging people to see it as a journey of discovery, of self-discovery, rather than a hike or a party time.
As you mentioned that, I did the Portuguese a couple of years ago, and towards the end of it, I met a group of people who just basically they changed different routes, but had absolutely no intention of visiting Santiago at all. Which I was quite disturbed by, but I think I wonder if anyone else has come across that kind of thing. If anyone who's watching has got a question or a comment on that, please send it in.
Well, sure, Rudy, sure. But now, I've never been a hospitalier because I'm not that great at I'm not that great at dealing with people in that situation. I don't have Rebekah's patience or serenity. But I want to ask the question, does it matter how people behave, as long as they don't disturb us? What matters, it seems to me, is that they walk the walk and they experience the journey. I wrote Compostella's in the Pilgrim's Office as a volunteer for years, and people talk about the short-term pilgrims from Sarria not being real pilgrims. Well, I tell you, they were the ones who limped into the office, who limped on feet covered in blisters with tendinitis because they were trying to do this 100 kilometers in four or 5 days. Now, the thing we don't know is how many of them came back, how many of them realized that there was something in the Camino for them. So even if people are partying, Rudy, I would say, like John, how difficult as it is not to make judgments. And as I say, I don't have to deal with them in the albergue, like Rebekah, who's nodding wisely there. But we don't know that the Camino will speak to some of them in the same way as churches speak to some people and not to others.
Yeah, today's party animal is tomorrow's pilgrim.
Mm-hmm.
I try to tell myself that as I clean up the mess in the bathroom.
Rebekah, do you think we'll ever get a shot at being party animals?
Well, no, it's a blast. My first Camino, I had my share of party animalism, and it was great. And I learned how to cut loose and enjoy myself. So there is a place on the Camino for the party animal. But I just think that we need to maintain the idea that it's a place to be respected, and it's not just a frat house. No.
You're going to elaborate on your party animal status, Rebekah?
Pardon?
Are you going to elaborate on your party animal status? Is there anything you can repeat to the group?
I was pretty buttoned down, and before I went to the Camino, it was one of the places where I learned. I met some really wonderful people from other parts of the world who I had a lot in common with, and they happened to enjoy a glass or two or three of wine at lunchtime. So we did, and then we didn't move for another 3 or 4 hours, and that was okay. And I used the other languages that I knew, and I met these amazing people who are very spiritual people, and I let myself enjoy, which was something I'd never done before. So I try not to be too hard on the party animals, but I also try to remember the experience of 2 nuns who stayed with us here in our house, 2 sisters of St. John from France. And they had been put in an albergue room with 4 biker boys, the spandex clad biker boys. And they were frightened and upset and sad because they were on a pilgrimage, and they were put in this room with these drunken louts. Now, this is a pilgrimage for these sisters. Why were they subjected to that? So I try to remember we need to be respectful of all the people and all the people on this trail. And sometimes it's a hard balance to strike. And that's just me. And maybe I am accused of being a judgmental and an old schooler and a hard person, but hey, this is my experience. This is me.
So in my case, it wasn't, as I say, it wasn't party animals. It was people sort of route jumping with no intention of visiting Santiago. Laurie, are there any memorable conversations or meetings that you've had with the pilgrims that have changed you in any way?
It's certainly when I walked to Santiago the first time in 1986, I was very, very fortunate to meet some of the real pioneers, like Monsieur le Marquis and Madame de Bril and Pablo Payo, and a lot of people who are no longer with us, but who were very fundamental in really laying the groundwork, or really keeping going what had always been there, tenuous though it was. And they were always very reverent about the Camino. And I think I absorbed that. I met very few pilgrims on that Camino. There simply weren't very many. And so my Camino was pretty quiet. But over the years, I guess I've listened to a lot of amazing stories, really amazing stories. But the trouble is, they're all kind of confidential. So I don't feel I can repeat them. They were some very, very moving and really stirring. And they do, as John says, both Johns say, the interior dispositions of people, you can't make a judgment about that. Sometimes appearances are very deceptive. And, the most unlikely seeming person can be somebody who is profoundly affected by what they're doing and making resolutions all the way. But if I began on those stories, I'd probably be here till midnight, and nobody else would get a word in. But I think you can't work on the Camino and not be incredibly moved by some of the things that you hear and see, and what a privilege it is to hear some of those stories. Really extraordinary. Anyway, I yes and no, I guess, is the answer to that question.
Well, I'm going to pass it on to John then. John, again, are there any particular conversations or meetings that have stayed with you in the spirit of the Camino?
Yes, I mean, we mustn't run out of time for people who are maybe, who haven't had a chance to speak yet, but I'll simply say that I've never been, you know, as I say, my life, I feel, is a Camino, but I've never been, every day, whether I'm actually on the physical Camino in France or Spain or Portugal or wherever, I have always been incredibly influenced by the people I've met. You know, and I've learned lessons, amazing, incredible lessons. I've received the most unbelievable kindnesses and trust from people, so profound that, I mean, you know, even to speak of the experiences would move me to tears, even now, decade later, from having received the sort of unbelievable kindnesses that I've had. And indeed, some of the biggest lessons I've had along the Camino are from partygoers who suddenly sort of breezed in on my Camino and, you know, upset my Camino. And I've had to work, you know, hard. And they've often been as much of a gift as the incredible kindnesses I've received from total strangers who welcomed me into their homes. So I've never had, not had, profound experiences in meeting people, wherever they are, whoever they are, wherever they're from. I think it's one of the great gifts of the Camino, is a recognition that a lot of us have, is that there is this massive camaraderie, Camino family, and it's worldwide, and it's everybody, every race, every religion, no religion, white, black. It's just, it's phenomenal. I know of no other agency in the world that is so eclectic and moving and loving and profound, and has an opportunity and a potential to help us shift into a new turnaround and a new way of behaving and seeing each other, and you know, moving from fear and aggro and into love. I really believe that the Camino is and will continue, and is one of its greatest gifts to the world today.
I'm guessing, Rebekah, you're going to echo that, particularly in the situation you have.
Oh, all I can say is John Brierley, amen, amen. He said, what you said, it's so inspiring and such a beautiful thing to say. I feel the same way. And when the people who stop here, everybody has a story. I'm a kind of a story junkie. I love to hear people's stories, and I kind of try to draw people out when they're here after they've calmed down and rested a bit. And the way they care for one another, and the way the people they're walking for, the promises they've made, the reasons they're walking, that it's a beautiful place to be. I feel very, very privileged to live where I do, and be able to live here and do what I do, because it's not just, the Camino is not just a holy place. It's made holy by the people walking. The people walking are holy. Even the party animals, I'll give them that. But they all have a story to tell, and they're all worth hearing, most of them. So we're all very lucky to be a part of this world, and to hear what John says, it's quite inspiring. And frankly, over the last few days, I've needed to hear this. It's been a real pep talk for me. Thank you so much.
Well, Johnnie, because you're in Santiago, you're going to see people right at the end of their pilgrimages, and all kinds of states, from, I don't know, despair, euphoria, ecstasy. It must be incredibly moving when you see pilgrims arrive, and the reactions can be so diverse.
Well, absolutely. I mean, Wendy and Kimberly, the CSJ, organised a virtual Camino, and I was privileged to join them. I was there in real life, walking into the Plaza Obradoiro. And, you know, we all know that feeling, the bittersweet feeling of the experience of the Camino coming to an end, the joy of the achievement, but also the feeling of loss. That this wonderful feeling that you've stepped out of your normal life, part of the definition of pilgrimage, you've stepped apart from your normal life to make this holy journey. The thing that strikes me always is, yes, all these things we've said about other pilgrims, but the Spanish people and their goodness to us. Now, okay, we stretch their patience a lot, we pilgrims, but overall their goodness. And when you come to understand them, and Rebekah spoke about this concept of the promise which lies deep in the culture of Spanish people. Every Spaniard knows about the Camino de Santiago. And, you know, friends of mine would say, in their hearts, if Spaniards were being honest, there's not one that hasn't made the promise, dear God, even though I'm not sure you're there, dear God, if you grant my mother healing, if you help me pass my exams, if you help my daughter become healthy, I will walk the Camino to Santiago. And, you know, I don't care whether I've thought about this so much in my life, it doesn't really matter to me now whether that's rooted in superstition or rooted in a faith in God. It's opening the door, it's opening your heart to the possibilities that there is another way, that there is a power greater than you, that you're not the most important thing in God's universe. And if I do that, if I make this sacrifice, maybe things will improve for the person or the people that I'm making this intention. And that promise, I think, is a beautiful thing about Spanish pilgrims. And I've been privileged that many of them have shared it with me.
Right, I think you've all heard enough of me, but I'm sure there are lots of people who are watching this who'd like to take advantage of the panel here to ask a few questions. So please feel free to use the hands up function, or just stick your hand up and we'll try and get to you.
I believe William has his hand up. So if you just want to unmute yourself, William. You can't. Yes, you can. There should be a little prompt on your screen. Oh,
yes, I beg your pardon. I can unmute myself. Yeah, I'd just like to add another sort of reflection on the two themes we've been talking about just now. One, difficulties with party animals and so forth, and the other, the sharing of conversations with pilgrims, which may transform the pilgrim, may transform the hospitalero. The first place where I went to be an hospitalier, was at Estaing in France on the Le Puy route. There's a community there of former pilgrims, and each day they appoint one person to do the accueil, the welcoming. And at the end of that 24 hours, he's asked by the others to tell of any difficulties or wonders that he encountered. And, that's the moment when you can say, oh, there were these party animals, or I had a conversation with a pilgrim, which ... And nowadays, Lucy and I do go as hospitalier to Vézelay. And there we're not, reporting day by day. We report at the end of our time there. And there was one time when I was saying, during this week or whatever, we haven't had any real difficulties and we haven't had any real marvels. And just at that moment, a pilgrim appeared who had got lost on his way out of Vézelay and wandered in the woods and given up and come back. And he then took the opportunity to talk in private with the brother, the monk, who was there. And I've no idea what he said. But clearly, at the last minute of having said rather dismissively, oh, no marvels, we had a marvel.
Very nice. Thank you very much.
Marvels happen. Yeah.
I think every day on the pilgrimage, there is something that will stay with you, whether it's a conversation you have or something you see. I think it's one of the delights of the Camino, and just being open to it as well. And the longer, as everyone's mentioned, the longer you go on the pilgrimage, the more the Camino takes over. Right, are there any other questions?
Don't you think that marvels happen daily, no matter where you are? Is this just a pilgrimage thing, or is it we just more open to that here?
You're more aware of it, I think, on the Camino. But you are right; they do happen everywhere. But I suppose with the fact that when you're on a Camino, you notice more and more because you're removed from your life, as John said.
I have a question from Seamus. Saying that right? Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Seamus.
First of all, I'm envious of people who live on the Camino. Rebekah on the Meseta, which was a part of the Camino, which I loved, and Laurie is it, who lives in Ocibrero. I'll never forget the climb up to Ocibrero. It was quite challenging. Now, I'll just give you briefly my own Camino experience. I did it in different stages, 2015, 2016, 2017. So there's a big section I haven't done yet between Leon and Ponferrada. So I was planning to do that the year COVID came. What year was that? 2020, yeah. And so I couldn't do it. And then there was another one in coming from Madrid up to Sahagun, which I planned to do. But anyway, what I was doing was I was following some pilgrim groups on Facebook, and it was good because I was missing the fact that it was a lost opportunity. So that was the best thing for me to do. And there was a group last year, La Luz del Camino. They took a little light on a backpack, and I followed that the whole way. And it was fascinating. Some of you probably met those people last year. And so that really kept me going. It was a light for me in every sense of the word. And I wrote an article on it, and it was published in a Catholic Voice newspaper, which is published in Mayo. Somebody mentioned Mayo there. I think it was John Brierley. So I've written an article on it. It's published, and I'm very happy about that. So I hope to get back to the Camino again and maybe do it all in one go, rather than I was kind of being comfortable with myself, and it suited me for various reasons, just to do it in different sections at the time. And, you know, the first time I was in Santiago de Compostela, it was 1992, and I didn't even know anything about the Camino. And myself and my wife, at the time, we had a 2-year-old, a child, and we wanted to go to Spain, but we couldn't decide where to go. So we picked out Santiago de Compostela because we liked the sound of it. We liked the name, the beautiful sound, Santiago de Compostela. And because we had a 2-year-old, we were kind of, our lives were centered around him and all that. And then we noticed after a few weeks that you had people kind of coming into the square and looking very fit and tanned and hungry and all that. And we found out then about the Camino. So back then, like that was 1992, we decided to do the Camino. It took me over 25 years to get around to it. So, but it came at the right time in my life because I had to make a big decision about retiring and all that. So it came to me at the right time, and it was wonderful. So that's all I wanted to say. Oh yeah, I just wanted to ask Laurie, Ocibrero, the church. I loved the church there and the history around the church. Is that open now for masses? Not that I can go, but I'm just.
It is, yes, it is.
It is, yeah.
Yes.
But, yeah, I had a lovely experience there. The priest said, yeah, the priest.
12 o'clock and 7.
Okay. Yeah, the priest asked, was there anybody who would like to do the reading in English? And I volunteered. And to me, that was a very special moment. Very special.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. It was just wonderful listening to you. And the whole thing of the Camino is in good hands because of your great love for the Camino comes across, and your great respect and how you want to honor it. And I love that. Thank you. Thank you.
Lovely words. Thank you very much, Seamus. Agreed by everybody else here, I'm sure.
Freddie, is Jane trying to put her hand up? Yes, Jane McLennan.
Oh, hi. Yes, let me just ask you to unmute, and then you should be able to. Yeah.
I've just got a really simple question after listening to everybody. Does the need or the ache to do a Camino ever go away? Or once you've fulfilled it, I've walked it once, but I can't stop thinking about it all the time. And I've just wondered if there's a point where you think, okay, I'm fine now. That's it.
Can I make a reflection on that? You know, it's something that Johnnie Walker mentioned earlier about how, you know, when we often see people arrive at Santiago, a great sort of sadness comes over us as we realize a sort of a special journey has sort of come to an end, and we need to. I've seen that with people, you know, a deep sadness. They're going back to maybe a work that doesn't suit them, or a partnership that no longer works, or whatever. Now, and of course, other people who see a new way or new steps in their life and are excited about that. What changed for me, and it was a really very big moment, and it was about 10 years ago, when I realized that really, I mean this quite sincerely, that my life became and was a Camino. So that therefore, it's about bringing the Camino home. We can't, if we need to be on the Camino all the time in order to have that sense of the sacred, of the divine, then we're missing something. We have to bring the Camino home into our everyday lives, I believe. And once we do that and make that turnaround, then life itself becomes so fulfilling and exciting, because everything becomes a learning experience. You know, we have tough routes, we have gentle downhill slopes, but life itself becomes a Camino. And I think that's a really enormously helpful to me when the moment I realized that the Camino doesn't end in Santiago, and for many people it actually begins there, or Finisterre, or wherever we end our physical journey. And then we, you know, whatever insights we obtained in walking that route, we then bring those insights back home with us to make them real in our daily lives. I don't know whether that helps, but that certainly helped me.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much.
With that said, there are sometimes when if someone says the word Camino to me, I'll just scream. There's times when it's just Camino, 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 and you get a little overwhelmed by the whole thing. But every spring, I want to get out there and walk. I just get that urge. I can relate to what you're saying. It's a wonderful place to be, to just let go of all of the ordinary and be into this extraordinary space.
Laurie, did you want to say something?
Can I add something to the last couple of comments? I knew, I want to mention two people that I was lucky enough to know, one of them who only passed away a couple of years ago. A man called Alejandro Uli from Zaragoza, who was a priest, and he walked the Camino as long as he could, and when he could no longer walk it in his 90s, he had a young nephew drive him. He made the Camino more than 50 times in the course of his life, and he felt that each time was a renewal and a kind of fulfillment. I don't think he needed to do it in the sense of, you know, having a compulsion to do it. But I think for him, it was a tremendous act of self-giving. And as he always put it, he always had people to pray for along the way. And the other person I wanted to mention, whom I met in 1986, another wonderful Camino stalwart and pioneer, Don Jose Maria Alonso of San Juan de Ortega. And I've written this anecdote and said it many times, but not in this company, so I'll repeat it. Wonderful anecdote about him. And when Larry Bolting's film crew was passing through there, making Within the Way Without in 2003. And the film crew which Larry always said was, quotes, a fairly hard-boiled lot. They thought they understood what the pilgrims were doing, but they were not sure quite what the hospitaleros were getting from this. And Jose Maria was out there in San Juan de Ortega in the middle of nowhere, winter and summer, making his garlic soup and welcoming pilgrims from all over the place, and never accepting a penny from anyone, just loving every minute of it. And he, you know, one of these film crew summoned his courage and said, well, why are you doing this? What is it that you're doing? And he just had a very inimicable sort of way about him. And he just said, oh, just changing the world one by one by one, that's all.
Yeah.
And I mean, as John says, I mean, you take the Camino home and live it. I've often thought that would be a wonderful slogan for a T-shirt if I were commercially minded. The Camino de Santiago, take it home and live it. And you know, you transform the world around you into a simulacrum of your beloved Camino. And that is how the world changes. If it is ever going to change for better, not through political parties, but by the conviction of living with attention and love above all else and in spite of everything, and never wavering in that, because it's what you know, that's the experience you've had. And I think you spend the rest of your life trying to correspond to it, if that makes any sense. You know, you receive so much that anything you can do to give back to the world from that is small by comparison. I think John Brierley, you and I would probably say much the same on that, although you say it much more eloquently than I can.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Thank you, all of you. I mean, amazing. And thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for being here too.
Lovely. Thank you, Jane. We have a couple of comments in from the chat. Trish says that she had a chat with the wonderful Marion, that's Marion Marples, who used to be the CSJ secretary for many, many years, until she sadly died a couple of years ago. And Trish said to Marion that she was so happy that she'd done the Camino and was going to hang up her boots. And Marion just looked at her and said, "Really?" Thanks for that, Trish. I think that sums up a lot of what we just said. And James May in Northern Ireland says that arriving in Santiago, my feeling was overwhelming disappointment. I realized that I did not wish to arrive despite starting in Le Puy, should have started in Vladivostok. Camino is a metaphor for my life and fear of the end. That, James. Lovely. Let's do one final sweep across many pages of faces. See if there are any more hands up. Anybody wanting to ask any last questions or make any last comments? I can't see anyone. Alrighty. Okay, well, we are starting to lose people. It is 8:15 here in the UK, 9:15 for you in Spain. It's getting a bit late. So, whilst I'm sure we could all listen to you for many more hours, we will draw things to a close for today. Simply fantastic. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you also so much to the audience for coming in and listening. An enormous thank you, of course, to our host Rudy, and of course our wonderful guests, true legends of the Camino. Many of us here will have benefited from the work that you've done for pilgrims over many years, and we are extremely grateful and very lucky to have got you all together here this evening. So thank you so much for your time and your wisdom tonight. That's it for now, but do check out the events page of our website at caminopilgrim.org/events for details of what else we've got coming up to mark the Feast of St. James on Sunday. Johnnie has popped into the chat there a link to the live stream of the services going on in Santiago Cathedral via TV Galicia. So do jot that down, it's just in the chat there. In the UK, we've got a concert, we've got church services, we've got walks, we've got bring and share lunches. And if you're based here, do contact your nearest CSJ regional group rep to hear about what's happening locally to you. I will pop my email in the chat just now if you wanted to me to put you in touch with your nearest regional group leader. But otherwise, stay safe, everyone, and have a very happy St. James's Day. Thank you again. Buen camino a todos.
Adios.
Bye.
And thank you, Rudy.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.